Hey everyone, Andrew Reiner here, joined today by JV Gwaltney.
Hey, what's kicking?
And we have a special guest standing behind me to my left right now with the flaming sword, Darren Sugg, creative director of Fortnite.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Thanks for joining us. We have a ton of questions for you. Oh, I didn't mean to attack you.
That's fine.
We have a ton of questions for you about the release of this game. It is very unconventional, something I don't think a lot of people have seen before. You released a physical game that you can pay for at retail, get in a box or download, but it is a closed beta. I'm terribly confused by this. What does that mean exactly over at Epic?
It means that we got some stats from, I think it was Sony, that basically said that 2/3 of people in Europe still only buy games physically. And so if we wanted people to participate in this early access program over there and be sort of fair to everybody, we had to produce some amount of physical discs in order for us to allow those people to be part of the program. And it was like, one of the things early on is like we really wanted everybody, global, like we're in Russia and everything else at the same time, to be part of the experience and first-rate citizens in all of the Fortnite community. And so it's interesting the difference between North American stats and European stats. So that was one of the things where like, well, if we make a disc, then we're going to be fair to everybody in how they acquire it. So here we are. I mean, I know it's probably not a shock to you guys that the majority of people participating are actually participating digitally, but
No.
So that's not that weird. Right now people have been like talking about that a bunch, and I'm like, man, like it's tough because just we are very North American centric sometimes, and we realize that things are different where other people live.
Right.
And they consume games in different ways, and they have different ways of going about it, and it's just like one of those things that we're like, well, if we do this, that will make it easier for those guys to be part of the program.
So what is, in Epic's definition, closed beta? What exactly does that mean? Like, how far along are we in the dev process? Obviously, the game's going to be free to play next year.
Mm-hmm.
What is the kind of founder program? What are we looking at here exactly in terms of content and, I guess, finished state?
I'm the worst guy to ask because I'm like, I think about Fortnite of like, hey, what is Fortnite going to be in the next 5 years? So to me, I'm like, well, we're in the founder's year, so that's year one. Okay. And I think there's going to be a ton of stuff by the time we get to year 5 of the way the game grows, because it's built to be an online game. But the thing that we have now is there's probably about 60 hours of narrative quests in the game right now. The core systems are more or less functioning. The UI, I think I've already sort of commented to other people. I view if we're trying to aim at 1.0 for a finished UI, we're kind of at 0.25 of that UI. So there are aspects of the game that do not have tutorialization. We're going to add that, and that's been an interesting journey as well, because as we've interacted with online testers, they have an amazingly high tolerance for things that are just like not finished. They will go figure stuff out. It's just the nature of that. And so whenever we interact with that audience, they're like, just make me more features. Like, I don't care about making it, the opening of the game better or teaching more stuff, because I've already figured that out. But we are constantly juggling those two things between like, how do we create a good solid onboarding and understanding of the systems we have in the game versus just continuing to fabricate new content.
Yeah.
So that's sort of like, so I think from our perspective, because that opening of the game and we want to continue to build more content for the game, we view it as unfinished. Like, Epic has just a really high bar about what finished looks like, and we like to communicate that to people when we're talking about the game.
And you said a 5-year plan. That's kind of what you're looking at. Is that kind of like, from the inception, was that kind of the starting point? Obviously, the game started 6 years ago. Yep. It was announced at least.
Yeah, the game, yeah, as always, like having talked to you guys before, the game's concept and the trailer and some of those early things actually predate even me. So, but the idea of the core of the game has remained very solid because like it's a cool fantasy to go around, build forts, and defend from creatures or other players. But over time, we eventually we said, hey, we're going to make this an online game. And once we got to that point of like, okay, it's going to be an online game with a lot of players in it, we're going to have, that means we're going to have to commit a significant amount of time. And the minute we made that switch, then we started talking about things. Okay, what's post live games look like? Other games sort of start out from the beginning, right? Like there are games that show up and be like, hey, this game's going to be a 10-year game from announcement to that. We are just a little bit like, yeah, we kind of had a similar thing. We just didn't well articulate it, I think it's the way to explain it.
Well, it's such an ambitious game, and I love the scope that you guys have gone for here. There's obviously a lot to do in any given mission, whether it's building or scavenging, and then the combat phase as well. It's a unique blend. I really dig what you have going here. But it is super complex, and I think this is a question JV wanted to ask.
Yeah. Because when you were talking about onboarding and sort of like, where the UI is to version 1, what do you think is what does Epic estimate is the learning curve for this game? Because I've sunk, I'd say about 10 or 11 hours in it, and I still get lost in the menus and the complexity. It's a very intimidating game. Like Reiner says, it's kind of an exciting fusion of like these various game modes, but especially like when you're in the menus, there's just so much. So what do you guys think is the actual like learning curve for this?
It really, the thing I guess I find out is generally mostly about the how familiar you are with like-minded collection-based games. So ultimately, if you understand like card collection or how you level these things up, then you are, you kind of like have a easier time with it than if you have not seen something like that. So if you're like, oh, I've never played an RPG like this before, then yeah, it becomes a bit more intimidating than players who are like, oh, I've seen leveling and evolution style games before. So that's usually the biggest thing. So there are a bunch of people who's like, oh yeah, I totally like play games that you level up guys and you evolve them with ingredients and blah blah blah. Like you're cool. If that's a whole new experience for you, then we've got to teach you. And that's actually the biggest weakness right now in terms of the tutorialization around those menus. Going back to my preceding comment about how many can we get everybody into Fortnite that wants to play Fortnite, the number one piece of feedback we kept getting over and over again was like, I want to play this game on consoles. Like we just kept getting it. It would be like, this game is great, like why isn't it on consoles? So we went back to the beginning and we're like, okay, we're gonna make the console switch, see if we can redo the UI and really get us a foundation to develop over the next couple of years. And so we did that, but we also made trade-offs of like, okay, well, as a result, we're going to have to rebuild a bunch of stuff around the tutorialization of those menus. And so like right now, like most of the menus are enabled by default. Like you can see everything, but in our long-term plan, like some of that stuff will be hidden from the user until they're ready to sort of consume it. But again, back to the early access conversation, a lot of players are like, oh, I already understand it, just show me. And so we made a choice to do that initially. And then over time, what we'll be doing, probably in the next 6 months is sort of sharpening that opening of the game to make that a little less intimidating and adding more tutorialization of the game or ways to learn better. I won't even say formal tutorials, but just how you go about learning the game.
Okay.
So again, so to go back to the first year, the Founders Club, people hear it's going to be free to play next year. What incentive do they have to buy it now? Like, what is the reason to get into the Founders Club now? What are you getting that you won't get a year from now outside of just having it early, right?
Yep. So for starters, obviously there's stuff in the packs that we are just that you'll just be available during the founders period only. So that kind of exclusivity style items and that. Plus, we're running events. So and everybody can go to the internet and sort of figure out, oh wow, there's a bunch of stuff in these packs. It's fairly, from my perspective, it's fairly traditional for these style games. Whether if you're familiar with a Warframe, I think is actually a fairly decent analog against that. You get in early. We'll give you a bunch of stuff for supporting us early, and try to be as generous as we can with regards to that stuff. But then on top of it, we were like, well, what else can we do? So we're running, like right now, we're running a Founders Pack event. So there's unique loot during this first month period that you're able to get at a fairly easy clip comparatively to the game. So we're going to run events that we probably won't rerun ever. Well, actually, I won't say probably. We won't rerun again. And so as a result, people who adopt early just are able to get different loot or it's easier to get stuff, et cetera, early portions of the game. So, and then on top of it, like whenever last week or whenever we did, we gave everybody a bunch of llamas for basically buying in the first week.
Now, llamas, just to describe it for people who don't know, that is a form of loot crate.
Right.
Yep, that is basically a card pack or loot crate. Depends. I'm old, so I remember card packs. So I'm like, yeah, it's nice. It's like that.
And a question about the game itself here. Speedrun. We have 1 day left. Most of the matches I play, we take our time. Like I was scavenging quite a bit there. Do we want to try to do it as quickly as possible, or is it better off to take your time and build up the structures?
It really depends on what the aim of the group is. Like some people are like they want to roll in and get the most amount of points and XP and rewards, so they can aim for that. But the game allows players to take the time that they need. That's actually why we have the bonus things. Like it lets people decide, like, well, is the bonus worth it? It's not going to cause me to not get the majority of the mission points, but it's a way for teams to optimize around it. And again, Fortnite is effectively a toolkit, so that means like players get to solve the problems of the missions how they want. Everything from the type of heroes they choose to the type of weapons to the traps or how much building they do. So it's the same thing. So it just depends on what your desire is. I think pro players start after a while they start aiming to refine their game, and in doing so they'll try to hit the badges. Like this guy right now is like, hey, we're defending the van, so they're going.
Yeah, they've got a nice little fortification here.
Yep.
And as the game goes on, are you planning on adding more building elements, I guess, in this first year?
There will be certainly more traps and weapons,
okay.
Without a doubt. So we will be adding new trap types that'll add more interesting. In fact, I was in a meeting right before I walked in here where we were talking about some of our new traps. So we will be adding more stuff with regards to that. Building pieces, there's a couple of ideas we have, but they're so central to the primitives of the game. We'll be thinking hard before you just throw one of them in.
Okay.
Yeah. So jumping back to how this is a game that you guys are, constantly developing, and you as you said earlier, you're sort of thinking about Fortnite like years ahead, like 5 years out. Can you talk any bit about, maybe some radical changes that could be like on the docket? Like this combat, is an essential part of it, and it feels, you're often shooting zombies. Like, do you guys see that ever changing, like drastically, like introducing like new elements to combat, or is it always going to be build a fort, defend it against like hordes?
So give me. I think I know where you're going, but give me an example of something you think that wouldn't be included in the current setup.
Just maybe more like raids or something that's not centered around forts. Something that's more like questing somewhere instead of defending a fort against, hordes and hordes of enemies. Something that sort of breaks away from the foundation of the game.
Yeah, I think we begin to experiment a little bit of that when you get into the next tier. Whether or not that's true, there are the destroy encampment missions where players are moving throughout the world and trying to eliminate creatures on their own turf. And I think we'll actually expand on some of that, both narratively and gameplay wise, as we expand the game. So yeah, I mean we definitely, things like, I won't say exactly the words, it'll be exactly what you expect in terms of raids, but the idea of a big encounter with players having to utilize the tools of Fortnite in a different way, is absolutely going to be on the docket. And we've tossed around a bunch of that, but one of the things we were, again, back to the like 5-year version and how much you want to develop beforehand and after you go live, we sort of had to remain disciplined and be like, okay, like we could continue to build, but let's get what we've got out there with the core, and then we can build on top of it later. And so that's sort of where we're aiming right now.
And I'm going to put a little asterisk on our comment. Obviously, we're still early in the game. We're still in, I believe, Stonewood. Getting toward the end of that. There are 3 other regions that we have to unlock yet. This game is huge. You can sink tons of hours into this. What are we going to see that's different in those upcoming zones for people that are maybe in the same spot we are?
Yeah, so like I said, once you move into the next region, you'll be able to deal with wiping out encampments. So players who are trying to do a little bit more run and gun. There's also building missions at the high end of this area where you can go in and build radar towers for people who are like, oh, I just want to experiment with the building and learn more about it. They can do that. And then we also have things like Deliver the Bomb, which basically has players building tracks on the ground and moving an ammo cart from point A to point B and defending it along the way, and effectively shooting some high-tech weaponry into one of the sort of corrupted areas of the storm. So like we have actually experimented with quite a bit with the track system. It's not in the build right now about the rest of the cool stuff you can do with it, but our expectation is over time it's like, imagine there are tracks that you could put in your outpost, and you can like put little gun turrets on them, or put your defenders on them, or ride them around, like that kind of stuff you'll begin to see as you move into the next area. And we're going to expand basically again back to the player toolkit as you go, and you'll see more of that in the next area.
So it sounds like you have some grand plans, and a lot of this stuff sounds very cool. But with free-to-play games, you never really know what you're going to get in terms of timeline of updates from the development team. What are you guys kind of looking at from the outset here of your schedule? Weekly, monthly, kind of where are you sitting?
I think we're probably going to run I think we're going to run events probably in the 3 to 4 week cadence of various scales, and I think we'll see major updates probably in the 60, maybe somewhere between the 5 to 7 week cadence. It depends on what we're building. So if it's something super huge, like, it may take longer. If it's something a bit more modest, we will. But it is very important that there's always dynamic activities taking place in the game. And once we have more events, you'll see more of that. We have some cool stuff coming up where actually I'll talk about it. I'm just gonna say it. We're gonna have a couple of things where storms could influence the properties of the level, as an example.
Oh.
And so you may enter into a storm that like a firestorm, literally, and like the creatures that are dropping are flame based, and they deal more damage to wood, and they have different properties. And the flip side is the Vindertech technology also could be augmenting you in a way like, it doubles melee damage in this area as well. And so you'll see more gameplay changing properties over time during the storm event as we play around with that. And so that'll alter up some of your gameplay, and of course offer more rewards for doing it as well.
Cool.
Yeah, I really like you referring to Fortnite as sort of like the tool set, because I think that's where my main joy with the game has come so far. For example, early on when I was playing, I was trapped in a building and there were just like a horde of zombies, and I didn't have that much room to maneuver against them, so I couldn't really do combat. So I ended up breaking out my pickaxe and escaping through a wall, and I just love stuff like that. So I was wondering, what are some of the sort of best player-driven stories that you've heard or like seen firsthand from the toolset that you guys have created? Like, what are some really cool out-of-the-box moments that have happened with Fortnite?
Well, yeah, it's everything from, I'll pick an easy one, but I think it's good actually for me to tell people about, is that sometimes people get a little lost in the game and they're like looking for objectives. And, and after a bit of time, people begin to realize, oh, wait, like I could literally put a bridge into the sky and look around to reveal the map for me and find my destination. That's why, like, just by going up in the sky and looking around. And so that makes a big difference for people who are like, oh yeah, so I can expend some resources and shorten my time on that. That's like the first, I think, people when people realize it. It's also possible, like, people begin to realize that they can actually destroy the entire structures of things around them. So sometimes, especially at harder levels, like line of sight against the creatures and being able to burn them down quickly, because like these artillery guys that are working our base right now from the distance, like they'll be back to, hiding behind buildings or hiding behind debris on the map. Sorry, yep, you see that going right now.
Yeah, be right back. I'm checking this out.
But basically, players are able to destroy the foundations of those buildings and bring the entire building down. And I think, I don't think people realize that right away, that's the kind of power they have. And once they start doing that, then it's awesome. And you see this guy down here. I'm down looking in this pit, and there's a pitcher down there. The third thing that usually is cool to see is when players start creating like their build a better mousetrap. We've got push traps that can actually throw creatures off of cliffs and whatnot, and throw them down into pits as well. So like when you start seeing like the perpetual motion machines where they're like the creatures are walking up the thing, getting flung back down to the pit, then they try to come back up and they get flung back. It's really, really cool. And it's like that kind of like those players that are into using the building in a really creative way end up like creating some really crazy stuff.
That sounds super cool. I need to mess around with stuff like that. I'm all about just running and gunning, but I need to incorporate more of the traps.
Yep. Yeah. Initially, the game is very forgiving in terms of the tool. Like specifically because we're offering the toolkit, the game is very forgiving early on. Where like, hey, run and gun is a thing, because we actually pseudo did that on purpose in order for people that were like, hey, I'm more into third-person action shooting games, and I need to feel like the gunplay is fun and awesome, and that gets them on board to the rest of the stuff that comes from the building kit. So that was somewhat by design. Like the reason why you start with Ramirez as a soldier is part of that, because we know that for a significant portion of people that's a core fantasy. So we start there and then we widen you up. Like that's why the Outlander and the Ninja take a little bit of time for you to unlock and sort of get into what they're about.
And I was kind of lurking in your forums, the fan community, seeing what people wanted. One big thing they're asking for, they're really latched onto the characters. They want skins. Is that something you guys are considering?
So, yes and no is basically the way they explain it. Is that I think what we'll end up with is the ability to take appearances from one hero card and move them onto another. I just don't know when we'll be able to do that. Like that is something, like the idea is super solid. It's just a question of how we implement it, how it works, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
It's we're right now we try to offer appearances that match some amount of gameplay, but we recognize that people are like, well, I just really like the appearance of this one hero. So, but that's going to take a bit of time to do, because there's just a long list in front of it.
Right. And so now we just had the loading screen that said closed beta. Is it going to be closed beta until it's free to play, or will that eventually disappear and say something different?
Since because I don't know what 2018 is going to look like. I mean, we could be in April, we could be in December about when we do that. It's a long road. So I don't actually know the answer to that. It could be, hey, we'll just keep it until we go full free, or we may run. Maybe we'll do some interstitial stage in between that.
But people shouldn't be afraid of that, right? Like their progress is not going to disappear.
Yeah, we are. We went through a significant amount of that with the online test, and we actually talked about that too. But we were like, nope, we're gonna figure out a way to make sure we preserve everybody's things to the best of our ability. There are some things that are unavoidable. Like I could imagine us reworking the skill tree and then refunding everybody's points, and then they'll have to respend again.
Respect.
Those respec moments I think are going to be part of it. But messing with people's collection of schematics, the amount of points you have, to that point, it's like if you respec, you get to respend what you have. We're not going to do that to the users.
So,
go ahead. Yep.
So people that were in, that were watching us play the game, obviously it does not look super complex here. Here's where all the complexity is, and a lot of it in the menus, where there's all these squads and defenders and expeditions, and then the skill trees. There's 4 of them. No, there's 8 of them. With the research tree. Can you kind of just walk us through? I can kind of go blade to blade, kind of what people need to pay attention to here a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the major, like, if I had to pick one thing to say about, like, hey, I don't understand anything about what's going on in the game, I think the only thing that people will realize is that if you have an empty slot, you should go to your picker and put something in it. And chances are, if you've got a high number, whatever the highest number thing in any of those slots, you should put it in, and then you're good. It's just like the like people, like, we have a personality matching system that as you get into the mid game, like creating synergies between the different cards, like it are basically set bonuses. Like anybody who has I don't know, pick your WoW, Diablo set styles. They basically are set bonuses for people. But you don't have to start there. The first thing you should do is like, hey, I should put some people into my survivor squads, and the survivor squads just augment the core attributes of the heroes. And we have 4 sort of RPG style attributes, though we call them the fort stats, and they effectively deal with increasing your health, your ability to deal damage with ranged and melee weapons, your shield power, and your tech, which is traps and some of your hero abilities.
That totally makes sense, and I think that's all we really needed from you here today.
Yeah, sounds good.
Fascinating. Games are changing every day, the way they're launched and all that stuff, and it seems like you guys are doing something really unique and cool at this point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Fortnite grows. Like, I'm very, very interested to see just how it changes over time. And I am not usually someone who's like invested in like early access games or whatever, but between PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds and this, it's definitely a trend I am slowly becoming invested in.
Well, I think, people, the 2 things like I want everybody to walk away with, I think, when they think about where we're at, is that we are committed to do that. As long as players want us to keep making the game, we're committed to keep making it. And it's a big game with a multi-year plan behind it. And so when people get in on the ground floor, we want to treat those guys well for like I've said in the past, for having faith in the game, and we're going to do our best. There are things in the balancing of the game that we will be iterating through to make more friendly. It's just we're just so, like, this kind of thing with this level, like, there's so many people that showed up, is like, we're like, wow, there's a lot of people in the game now. People are real excited, and you're right, like, people just haven't been exposed to this. But Epic has a high bar for what good looks like, and communicating both the details of like, hey, we're an early access game for real, we mean it when we say it, and we're going to be free to play. I mean, there's been a bunch of games in the last couple of years that, and it's not anybody's fault, things just happen, but they convert from like, hey, like, a year later after launch, they go free to play, and people are always like, I'm sad that I didn't know that at the beginning. And we were like, well, we should just try to tell people what our plan is to the best the knowledge that we can. Mm-hmm. So there's no one's surprised. So sometimes when I see stuff, people talking about the game, I want to be like, we're trying to give you as much information as we have at that moment. Like, Epic is a place like where people, they care about the players playing the game, and we care about talking to them. So if everyone's like, yeah, come join the community, we're going to make this game better. There's going to be features that you guys, that the player base wants, and we'll go out there and we'll make them. And hopefully it'll be awesome.
And where can people go to find this information as you go along? Is there a key spot you're communicating, social or a website or forum?
Yeah, if you roll to Fortnite.com, that'll start you on the journey to get all kinds of information about where we're at and where we're going with the game.
All right. Thanks for your time, Darren, and thank you for helping me finish a mission. I have one last question for you.
Yeah, man.
The game is everywhere except Nintendo Switch.
Yeah. Do you think that Switch players would like it if we put it on there?
I do. I think that would be a very smart move.
All right. I'll put
add it
that
to
on
the list.
Yep.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.